All right, so to start on the highest of high notes, please note the sarcasm. This is picking up exactly from where I left off, and I probably should have finished the last one with this fun, uplifting picture or statistic. But here we are, and the next one gets worse. The next slide does. So these are our statistics on lynching from 1889 to 1918. And all I got to say about it is thank you, Georgia. For once, the baddest of bad. The Crown does not make it to Mississippi. So hat off to you, Georgia, and your own bloodthirsty and insanely racist demeanor. No, not demeanor. Let me think. Political leanings, soul. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. So after this, like I said, it's about to get worse. So this is a crowd that was photographed. It says, so I'm sorry, I'm going to read the caption that is here supplied for me, and it is what it is. The above crowd was photographed at the aftermath of the raping of Laura Nelson and lynching of both Nelson and her teenage son for the suspected murder of a sheriff's deputy. The image was reproduced as a postcard and sold at stores. As was typical for most lynchings, no one was prosecuted for the crime. So, I think that's about all that can be said about that. This is a carving from around 1875 that juxtaposes Robert E. Lee with the crucified cross. So that's an interesting take on things. But it does kind of show the religious undertones of the Lost Cause. And it also is something that my husband, who, while going to a very progressive small liberal arts college and joining a fraternity, was very confused when he realized there was a lot of this stuff going on behind it. Because, like, I don't know, it just seems like we're seriously, like, this is still happening. Like, people still think this kind of weird stuff, and they're proud of it. That is the most, like, mind explosion, is that they're like, yeah, I believe in that, and yeah, it's great. It's like, do you think, like, at all? Just, why do I ask? The answer is no. Okay, this is our next focus question, and it is for another, whoops, that's the textbook that I have pulled up on the side. There we go. Okay, so now you can actually read your focus question. And not my progressively more and more sarcastic, like, notes that I took in the textbook and stuff. You have to be sarcastic in your own notes, because if you're not, like, what are you even doing, man? All right, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make this the correct size for me to be able to read it. Okay. So in what ways did the boundaries of American freedom grow narrower in this period? And this begins on page 679 in the textbook. So let's go. Okay, so we have nativism and exclusion. I don't know why they had to specify that nativism was going to then have exclusions, because, like, we know, right? Like, I didn't think it was anyway. So the relegation of Black people to the position of second-class citizens, it was just a reflection of what was going on nationwide in thought and political policy. So as our 19th century comes to a close, it's clear that American society is at a kind of a a fault line where it's going to fracture along the lines of class and race. Or, like maybe if you're like a super optimist, you're like, it might not, but everyone else was like, okay, that's cute. So because of this, it seems like overall that there is kind of a widespread, just like an obsession with redefining and redrawing the boundaries of freedom by saying which people are and are not worthy of liberty. I guess one could say during the initial revolutionary time period, it could be seen that, the people then were able to draw this, like, who deserves this liberty and this freedom and who does not. I guess you could say that, it was easier for them and not quite as having to say the quiet part out loud, because it was just assumed that anyone who was not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant was, yes, they're worthy. And then all those other people, Catholics, like we might have to let them do a couple things because, our population of just people is kind of low. But like, we know who the people that we're going to let do things are. But as we get, this kind of more muddied waters in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it becomes a question again. This is when people are like, hi, excuse me, I need you to clear up who I should be racist against and who I shouldn't, because it's so hard to keep track. We went through in class a bunch of super racist political cartoons, and I always say that that's my favorite time period, and I don't mean because I agree philosophically with these morons, but at least you know where people stand, and they're not trying to hide it behind some veneer of politeness and civility. Like, it's flat out, these people are stupid, they are uncivilized, and there is no possible way for us to fix it. So they should be thankful for the protection that we as white Americans and especially white Protestant Americans, they should be just thankful for the protections that we give them, because God made me a white Protestant male. Usually it's male. I think that we can all agree on that. And if you are a male who doesn't, I don't care. Sorry, y'all. I'm kind of exhausted right now. So keeping on moving, the latter portion of the 1800s sees a major shift in immigration sources. So, like, demographically, we move away from our traditional pipelines of Ireland, England, Germany, Scandinavia. And then we move into what I believe I'm allowed to say this, because maybe I'll just do an implied. A former president once called these places, I believe he classified them as the S word whole countries. I do hope I'm not misquoting, but I'm pretty sure that was the exact term. Anyway, now we are in the late 1800s, really 1890s, this last decade. We get about 3.5 million immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, especially like Italy. And Russia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Like, this is where a large bulk of these people are coming from. And I would like to point out it's because of the continued persecution of their Jewish people. There are Jewish pogroms that are going on, ethnic cleansing on behalf of the Romanovs. They loved themselves a good ethnic cleansing. So it's bad out there for people. It's bad out there everywhere for people. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying that these people should not have come to America and, had to experience the racism and marginalization that they experienced here. But at least here they were living. right? Like, I mean, at least they kept on breathing, where, you know, in Russia, nobody was too concerned about that stuff. So, these people that are what are considered our new immigrants, I don't know, it's the stupidest term, but it's like like a historical term. People are like, yeah, these are the new immigrants. It's like, all right. Um, Native born Americans look at these new people as like they are not part of the same race as people from England or definitely like Ireland, but Ireland's also like one of those toilet races, so you know, as a Murphy, I think I get to say that. Um the English or like just kind of white European, that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about any of those people who like might have to find like, okay, so if you were someone who would have had to buy your makeup through Rihanna's inclusive beauty brand, you're probably not going to be part of the same race as many of the people that were already here. I think that's pretty clear. And if it's not, go look up her like makeup brand. It's amazing. It's Fenty. Okay, guys, I know you're all running out to do that. Um, so they see these peoples as distinct races. They see them as being lower civilizations. So it's not even just that there is a racial divide. There is an understanding of what it is to live one's life correctly. This is what they use, and this is how they explain these people's willingness to work for like very little pay. And they are supposedly more genetically, they have tendencies toward criminality. So these are going to be your criminals. Now, I feel like I'm experiencing deja vu. People that are new immigrants, distinct races, lower levels of civilization, working for substandard wages, okay, and inclined toward criminality. All right, just let you think on that one. A great quote that I have pulled out of your textbook, and by great, I mean terrible, um, from an economist who explains that this group of people were beaten men from beaten races, and they are representative of the worst failures in the struggle for existence. See, like I said, I enjoy a very clear statement that tells me right where you go. Like I know that, oh, this is not a good person. I'm not going to like you, but you're going to be really, really fun to torture. So, you know, it's like we all have our preferences. Okay. There is something called the Immigration Restriction League that is formed in 1894. And it's formed by Boston professionals. Woohoo, Boston! They hang on to racism for a good long time, even though they pretend like they don't. Like, that is one of the things that really gets me about Boston is they are having to integrate schools in Boston well into, like, my lifetime. They're having to bus kids from one part of town to another part because they do not abide by the legal requirements of integration that were put in place because of places like where we're from. But at least, I mean, I don't know. I can't even make a statement on that one because, like, there's so many problems with just education in general, especially in the South and in places where I'm just moving on because I could rant all day about that one and we don't got the time. Okay. Immigration Restriction League, 1894, Boston professionals. They're like, you know what would be great? If we just cut down on the number of these dirty, like, minorities, these people that we all know aren't really people. What if we just stop letting them in if they cannot read? That sounds good, right? And Congress is like, yeah, man, that sounds fantastic. I am all for that. And this is a law that is passed by Congress, and President Cleveland actually vetoes it. And now keep in mind, Cleveland falls under one of the presidents that I have face blindness for, and I have a lot of trouble telling them apart. But because of that, I mean, he's not exactly, the holdout progressive in the era. Like this guy he's not someone that you would be like, "Ah, there it is. There's the savior of America, President Grover Cleveland." No, 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 no. But even he knew when it was time to be like, "Okay, y'all, like you got to at least pretend. Seriously, you want to do this is like completely out. Like you may as well just put up a big old sign that says, 'Go home, you dirty immigrants.'" And then I'm pretty sure if he had said that, they'd be like, "Can we?" And he would just go, "Ugh, okay." During this time, the North and the Midwest, they take a page from the South's edition of, "Why, no, we do not care to hear about your struggle, Mr. Adolf, but can I offer you some refreshment on the veranda?" And they have just about every single state in the country that puts in place limits on who was allowed to vote, and specifically using the Australian ballot, which is also like what we know of as the secret ballot. And they put this in place allegedly to protect a voting person's privacy. But what it ends up doing in effect is keeping people who cannot read from voting, because now that we have the Australian ballot, you don't have like poll workers that are able to then go to someone if they're like, "Hey, love to vote. That's really cool, but I've been like working my hands to the bone since I was like 3.5. So I never learned how to read. Could you read it for me? And then I can tell you who I want to vote for. And it can be a whole big, helping me, man helping man, because we still don't have the women the right to vote." Um, so by instituting this Australian ballot, that is no longer something that is allowed to happen. So if you couldn't read, while legally, you were still allowed to vote. You weren't allowed to vote in practice. Other states put in place voting restrictions prohibiting immigrants from voting before they're granted citizenship. They also have residency and literacy requirements because, remember, constitutionally, the states are able to kind of regulate their own voting laws. So this is where we end up with every 4 years, there's always a problem. It's usually Florida. And there is something to do with the method of balloting, the method of polling, what is allowed and what is not allowed. Like, there's always a controversy. And I don't think we would like see an election as an election if people weren't complaining about it. We do love to complain. So right here, this is a political cartoon that can also be found in, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to look at it. Okay. This can also be found in your textbook, but let me zoom in on it. This is a cartoon that was featured in Judge, and it is entitled "The High Tide." And I think it shows you, the anti-immigration sentiment, and we're seeing some very interesting interpretations of foreign countries. So, like I gotta see that. That says riffraff, by the way. Riffraff immigration. It should say raft, and they should have put a raft out there. All right, I take it back. This is not an impressive political cartoon. I do not care for it, and not only because of its message, but because the misuse of a pun. Okay. Get ready, everybody. We're going to be talking about some racism towards the Chinese. Okay. So, the boundaries of nationhood, meaning who is encompassed within our nation, it expands post Civil War with, our 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And this slowly begins to contract as military reconstruction ends, and as the people in the North are like, "Wait, what? No, we don't. We're done. We're done with it. We gave you like roughly a decade, okay, and you couldn't get back on your feet from that. Sorry, like you got to figure it out from there." Um, Neither political party So neither the Republicans or the Democrats like the Chinese. And even if you still have some populists like hanging around here, they're definitely not going to like the Chinese because these people, they're taking our jobs. No. Um, anyway, so initial Chinese immigration that's happens between like 1850 and 1870. This tended to just be single men who had been kind of lured to America by labor contractors when they're trying to find people to mine and build railroads. These companies would send labor contractors to China and they would be like, hey, do you want a job? I've got the best idea for you. And so that's kind of how this first wave of Chinese immigration really started. But then in the early 1870s, we have families beginning to immigrate. And when you have a family immigrate, that means we're not just here for money, it means we're here to stay. And so, oh no, everybody clutch your pearls because we're going a race mongering. Um, let's see, what did I want to say about this? Sorry, I had my notes and then I stopped because I was like, it's fine. I can wing it. And now it's going to be a lot less cohesive if you would consider what has previously come cohesive. We have Congress in 1875 that excluded Chinese women from entering the country. So if you were female and you were Chinese, you don't get to come to America. We don't even like the women we have there now. Like, why would we want others? California Congressman Horace, great name, Page, he was the bill's author. And in this, he is like, we want to do this because we are trying to preserve the health of white people. And when people went, wait, what? He said, well, yeah, duh, of course. All of these women coming in, no, they're not wives and mothers. They're obviously Chinese prostitutes. Come on, people. Do you not see what I see? I see these beautiful women, and how can any man resist? And I'm sure they're all riddled with STDs, riddled with them, I say. And we don't have penicillin yet, so perhaps I have an STD, and it is rotting away my brain steadily. You know how it goes, right? Right? Everybody's like, what? Horace? Ignore him. Immigration authorities, they're told like these women are prostitutes, do not let them in. And this law is enforced to, I mean, like, I don't know why the textbook specifically points out that it is enforced to keep out wives and daughters of the men who are coming to the country as well. I don't understand why that's like something that has to be pointed out. Like, there's no subtlety here. The bill's author is like, these Chinese women are prostitutes. All of them. All of them. And we know that if they come into America, they're just going to be plying their trade left and right. I mean, they're going to have so many of them here. Men are just going to like fall into them and then like, oops, whoops, cheated on my wife and now I have syphilis. So I don't know why I had to point that out, but just to be clear. So beginning in 1882, Congress is temporarily able to exclude immigrants from China from coming to America at all, period, end of sentence. Like, it doesn't matter if they're fake prostitutes. It doesn't matter if they are part of some strange Chinese acrobatic troupe that is really cool to watch, but also kind of creepy because you're like, how did these people's joints do this? And aren't they in pain? But so none of those people are allowed to come in. Non-whites are not allowed to become naturalized American citizens at all. I know this comes as a shock, but it's sometimes you just have to accept these world-changing pieces of information. But this is the first time that America is racist and creative enough to exclude an entire group of people from coming into the United States. An entire country. And we know how big China is, right? Like, if you're in my classroom, just look at the wall. That's a big old country. So that's a lot of people that we were like, keep them all out. Don't want them. Don't need them. Unless we need them to do super dangerous work that even the Irish aren't drunk enough to do. 10 years after passing this legislation to keep out the Chinese, Congress re-ups on it. They're like, yeah, that's a great law. Totally in support. And they renew this restriction, and then eventually in 1902, it's made permanent. Well, as permanent as anything is. In the late, I'm sorry, at the time that these acts are like put into place, we have 105,000 people of Chinese descent living in the United States, and pretty much all of them are on the West Coast. Like, it makes, geographic sense. The fact that where are you going to immigrate to from China? California. You're not going to like sit there and be like, let me go all the way across the continent of Asia or like around it and then around Africa. Like, this is going to be a pleasure tour. No, like they're coming straight for us because that makes sense, especially when you're on a boat, because nobody wants to be on a boat any longer than they absolutely have to be. There is intense discrimination. There is mob violence. In the West, you have Chinese people who are just kicked out of towns and mining camps. You have mobs attacking residences, businesses. The Chinese people are pretty creative in the way that they try to get kind of restitution for this. And they use the legislation that is put in place during Reconstruction, and they sue local governments for, I guess, kind of like, I guess the best way to say it is redress when their rights are violated. And they're also petitioning Congress for like indemnity in relation to all of these acts of violence. So, because of this, because people just can't be cool, and because they target this specific ethnic minority who is, looking at what was put in place in order to protect the rights of your newly freed Black people, or I guess it would be formerly enslaved. That's the phrase I was looking for. So yeah, they force our state and federal court systems to define exactly how far the 14th Amendment is allowed to have reach. So, a fun little fact here, which I feel like every time I say this fact, someone in San Francisco drops dead out of sheer, oh no, I can't be as liberal as I thought I was going to be. And this is coming from someone whose politics are not like super right leaning. I think everything about me like explains that. But, still pretty more conservative, pretty more. That's a great. Yes, I am so awesome, y'all. I am probably, I would go out on a limb and say more conservative than our residents of San Francisco right now, even though I think that might be shifting with all the dirty needles everywhere and people pooping in the streets. So San Francisco gives no education to Chinese children from 1871 to 1885. This is when I'm saying I'm pretty sure I just made someone in San Francisco drop dead. In 1885, the California Supreme Court hears a case called Tape v. Hurley, and this orders the city to allow Chinese students to go to public schools. In response to that, the state legislature passes a law that is like, hey, you know what the South is doing? Yeah, let's do that too. Only we don't have to do it with our Black population. We're going to do it with the Chinese people. Look at us. We are different. Joseph and Mary, actually, it says Tape. It's probably Tape. They had lived your plaintiffs here had lived in the United States. Their names are Joseph and Mary. Isn't that very Christian? And I don't mean to say that there's no sarcasm there. I just made the observation. They had lived in the United States since the 1860s, and they want their daughter to go to school like the other kids in her neighborhood. They're like, why? This is ridiculous. A quote from her is from Mary Tape is it a disgrace to be born a Chinese? Didn't God make us all? Pretty profound there, Mary. You didn't even realize it. This fails. Huh, great. And it is not until 1947 that California actually repealed the law authorizing the establishment of separate schools for Chinese children. The U.S. Supreme Court also is kind of forced to have a say here. They, the case Yik-Wo v. Hopkins from 1886. Here, the court unanimously orders San Francisco to grant licenses to Chinese-operated laundries, which the city had previously refused to do. The court declares that it is intolerable in any country where freedom prevails to deny a person the opportunity to earn a living. Let's see, I'm going to see. This is Anime Wong. Okay. 12 years after Yik-Wo, we have United States v. Wong Kim Ark. And here the court rules that the 14th, that the 14th Amendment awarded citizenship, good God almighty, to children of Chinese immigrants that are born on American soil. So I don't know why that was confusing for people. It's pretty clear citizenship is given to people born on American soil. But, you know, I guess you've always got the one person who's like, hey, excuse me, what about Chinese people too? Well, are they born in America? Yeah, but they're still like Asian. It's like, that's fine though. Like that was, see, like it's very clear. Very clear. And they're like, but are you sure? It's like, shut up. Just stop it. So on the flip side of this, of the decision in Wong Kim Ark, we still do have the Supreme Court that affirmed the rights of Congress to set racial restrictions on immigration. In the decision of Fong Yi-ting, or I think it's you, actually. Fong Yi-ting, 1893. The Supreme Court authorizes the federal government to expel Chinese aliens without due process of law. Writing for the dissent, Justice Brewer acknowledges that the power is now directed against a people many Americans find obnoxious. But who shall say, he continued, it will not be exercised tomorrow against other classes and other people. Brewer was right. He tended to be. So in 1904, the court cites Fong Yi-ting in upholding a law that keeps anarchists out of the United States. So, you know, like if you're, this is one of the things that people who cite slippery slope on legal decisions, this is what they're talking about. Is it's like, right now you want to keep out this one group of people, and pretty much everybody's on agreement of that. No good reason why, but they are. So, okay, let's do it. But if you do this, you set a very dangerous precedent for being able to apply this same kind of exclusion to a group of people that will come next. You know, like what keeps the American public from having their opinions changed against someone else? So, personally, I don't think anyone cared. Like, I'm pretty sure they were like, yeah, we're going to put this in law, and then later on, we're going to be able to use it for different reasons. So, good job, Brewer, for expecting the best out of people. But the more I study history, the more I realize that everyone sucks. Okay, so this kind of exclusion from civic life, um, really ordinary life of Americans, this shapes how Chinese Americans are able to interact and become American, for lack of a better term. Um, so we have many places across the country where you have what are called like Chinatowns, and this is where urban enclaves of populations that are of Chinese descent tend to live in these places, or at least they did, and then that's why the people were like, "Ooh, we'll be a little bit racist, but still okay. Chinatown, that works." So Congress kind of justifies this isolation, and adding on to that, they also for the first time find other people not specified by race. I know. I am just as shocked as you are. So they keep groups of white people from entering the country. But this is mainly prostitutes. I'm sorry. Ladies just trying to earn a buck here. Nobody will teach her how to read. Nobody will let her run anything. So it's like, what options does she have in front of her? Not that many. Okay. Prostitutes, convicted felons, lunatics, because that is the most specific term that anyone could come up with, or those likely to become a, quote, public charge. This means that, maybe they are old, infirm, whatever. We don't want our public monies to have to pay for them because they weren't even born here. A quote from a populist candidate from president in 1892. He speaks out kind of against this practice and says, "Are we still a place of refuge for the oppressed of all nations?" No. That's a hard no there. So this is the result of an anti-Chinese riot in Seattle, Washington. So those guys look real concerned with helping that sweet little smiling girl in the back. That guy looks like, oh, wow, look. It is very rare for me to see people of minority faiths in historical photos. Maybe it's just the historical photos that I've seen, but there just tend not to be a ton. But I like that. That's really cool that we have. I guess he would be a Sikh man. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, let's move on to our good friend Booker T. Washington. Nah, he wouldn't claim us. It's fine. So we have social movements that are helping to expand 19th century boundaries of freedom. And now they're starting to redefine what they want to happen within the economic and intellectual framework. So we have prominent Black leaders that, especially Booker T, who want to emphasize economic self-help and individual advancement into a middle class instead of having all of their energies geared toward political agitation. So I don't really know if I have anything to say about that. So Frederick Douglass, my man, he dies in 1895, which I love the way he writes. And Booker T. Washington is, sorry, I'm going to back up, like pretend the last 10 or 15 seconds didn't happen. Okay. So symbolizing the change was the juxtaposition of the death of Frederick Douglass with Booker T. Washington's speech at the Atlanta Cotton Exposition, widely called the fill up your bucket speech. It urges the fact blah blah blah. During the speech, good God, I think I do not know how to speak. During the speech, he urges Black people to adjust to segregation, to abandon agitation for civil and political rights. And we discussed this in class when I assigned it to you as one of our primary source readings, along with the Du Bois response to it. Washington is born a slave in 1856. He studies as a young man at Hampton Institute in Virginia, and he kind of like follows in the path of his mentor, the founder of Hampton, who emphasized obtaining farms or skilled jobs as something much more important to your African American populations that are coming out of slavery than, like, I guess, than focusing on rights of citizenship. So it's kind of this paradox of you get to become a citizen when your citizenship is no longer questioned. So if you are a contributing member to society by being a professional, or by being able to say, hey, I grow food and things, then that's more important than actually being able to vote, who is going to determine your rights. Booker T becomes the head of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, and it starts out as like vocational education. So we're gonna teach you how to do like a trade instead of a kind of, I guess you would call it a classical education. Obviously now, like I'm gonna say the things that I am like, we'll give it a 70% chance sure that I'm right about this. And since I'm already recording this and do not want to stop, because if I was going to stop, I would have already stopped when I started going way off the rails a few times. But I'm not going to go look it up. So let's see. Who knows who's right? You can fact check me later. Tuskegee is an HBCU. If you don't know what that means, historically Black colleges and universities. I used that term one time a few years ago and just got completely blank looks from people, and I was like, you really don't know what that is? Okay. It's still in Alabama. It's a fantastic place for higher learning. And in this speech that Booker T gives in Atlanta at the Cotton Exposition, he does this thing where he's like, we do not need to have just constant agitation for equality. Don't try to combat segregation. A quote of his from the speech is that in all the things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. He advises Black people to seek the assistance of white employers who would prefer a docile Black labor force to unionized white people. Okay, Booker T, I got a bone to pick with you here. You were apparently paying so much attention to the farming that you didn't read Marx. And Marx would tell you it doesn't matter. Workers united across color have power. So, basically 100 years later, I just done schooled you. No, I didn't. Let me make sure I don't miss anything here. So, the reason why Booker T becomes such a famous and influential person in his community is because we have wealthy northern whites who are funneling money to Tuskegee. And then obviously you have, some Black politicians and Black written newspapers that are supporting this. Like, it's I don't like it, but I can see why people would say, listen, this is what we got to do. This is the best we can do right now, because these people out there, they're crazy. Like, are you serious? Are you seeing some of this stuff? Did you see the chart about the lynchings? Like, it's not great. It's not great right now. So how about we just like lay low, let these people like think what they want to think, and just, keep your head down and hope for better times. But that's not how things work. So your textbook points out that his support from the Black community comes out of a widespread sense that the world of the late 19th century makes it so that direct assaults on white power and white power structures, not the white power, no, let's make some frontal assaults on that. Like, I think we should still be doing that personally, but okay. But yeah, basically it's like, let's invest in our own communities instead of trying to go out and conquer these other communities. Like, that is the stupidest of stupid. That would be a uphill battle. And if we can make what we experience in our daily life, if we can improve our own communities and give support to the people in, our Black communities, if we can do that, then we will be successful. We do not have to why are we going to play by these white people's rules and say that success only comes from mimicking or using the political systems set up by oppressors? I'm going to stop talking about that just because, again, I could talk all day. At least until the charge on my AirPods is gone. Here's a picture of Mr. Washington. I wonder if it's the light or if he really did have, like, light eyes. I always find, like, old photographs very unsettling when the person photographed has lighter eyes, because I don't know, I guess it's just the black and white or something, or it's just my brain being weird, which tends to be the answer for a lot of things. Okay, so we're going to talk about the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. I hate labor unions. I love labor unions. I hate having to talk about labor unions because to me they're just not, like, super interesting. But okay, here we go. With labor, the Knights of Labor, like, die. They're just gone. And then the AFL comes up while they're kind of stretching their wings, so to speak, during the 1890s. And this shows how, for a lot of reformers, that they are shifting away from trying to reform everything all at once, and they're focusing on limited goals. So our Holman and Pullman strikes, they show that basically if you're going to have a direct assault with a company, you are taking your life in your own hands. You are probably going to die personally. And if possible, your labor union or your little infantile labor whatever, it's definitely going to be destroyed. Samuel Gompers, yeah, that's his name. I don't know why it's such a weird name to me, but Gompers. And so the way I remember who he is, because I'm trying to think, I think I'm right. He was not born in America, but he founds the AFL and is president of it. And I think, I don't know why, this has got to definitely be the way I remembered it, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering it correctly. I call him Gompers because I think he was in, like, tobacco or something, maybe. I'll look it up after I finish recording this so that I can correct myself if I need to. But I always think of him, like, chomping on something, and so Samuel Gompers, AFL, they're in a meeting smoking cigars, and he's like, rah, 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 see?
Sorry. I'll try to, like, calm down before I do my next video. But so Gompers, he thinks that unions should not seek economic independence because it's just not going to happen. They don't think that separate parties should be formed to try to, like, break into government. He thinks that the labor movement needs to devote itself to negotiating with employers for higher wages and better working conditions for its members. So this is that kind of, like, small changes to make immediate impact. He's using this language of that era's business culture, and he kind of, like, pioneers something that's called as business unionism. He embraces the idea of freedom to contract, and he turns it into an argument against judges interfering with a worker's right to form a union. So he's like, hey, I thought America was about, like, freedom to contract. So then why can't we, like, band together and then find someone to represent our interests for us to make it easier, for the businessmen? And judges get tricked all the time, mainly by people who are smart. Okay. During the 1890s, union membership bounces back from its decline that happens in the 1880s, and at the same time, we are having less inclusivity in the labor movement. So originally, your Knights of Labor are all about, like, everybody's got to team up. We're going to get everybody. We're going to show solidarity. And the AFL actually restricts membership to skilled workers, which, I mean, the point of a skilled worker is that there's fewer of them. So it's already a small portion of the labor force, and it excludes a huge number of unskilled workers. That includes, like, basically almost all Black workers, female workers, new immigrants, no, new European immigrants. The AFL centers its membership on parts of the economy like printing, building construction. So these are industries where it's mainly dominated by small businesses with workers that all have, like, the same craft. And usually they're all ethnically part of the same, like, they have the same kind of ethnic background. The AFL has little presence in industries like steel or rubber, and they kind of don't pay any attention to large-scale factories that dominate the economy. Women and reform. Oh, okay. Well, it's called the women's era, but I beg to differ. Okay. Changes in the women's movement reflects a combination of the expansion of, like, activities that women now find themselves involved in, and the boundaries of which are becoming narrower. So it's called the women's era, the 1890s, and this is considered the 3 decades during which women that still cannot vote, cannot emphasize that enough. They have more opportunities than they had in the past for economic independence, and they're playing much more of a role in public life. So, at this point in time, pretty much every state has passed laws that give married women control over their own wages and property to, like, a point. And they also have the right now to sign separate contracts and make separate wills. Look at that, ladies. We have arrived. We have arrived. 5 million workers 5 million female workers worked for wages in 1900. Most of them are young, unmarried, and they are concentrated in traditional female jobs, female like focused jobs that you're like, yeah, that's a job for a girl. Domestic service, the garment industry, and we actually now have kind of one of our early generations of college educated women starting to take their place in clerical and professional positions. So, yay, ladies, and not just the ones that have off putting personalities and large noses and didn't get married in college. Like, there are also cute little girls going out to get themselves a job. A network of women's clubs, temperance associations, and social reform organizations allow women to exert influence on public affairs. We have the Women's Christian Temperance Union that is founded in 1874, and it becomes the era's largest female organization. Their membership by 1890 was 150,000 women. That is stupid. Like, temperance. This means no alcohol. Ladies. Like, I get it, but at what cost? Okay. They move from being like, no alcohol, because this is like the alcohol. The reason why they focus on the alcohol is because it's kind of thought that this is what makes men waste all their money to go get drunk, and then when they come home they beat their wives and children. It's not super wrong, but it should be. So instead of like just focusing on that temperance, they want to have economic and political reform. And most especially, they're like, hey, we want to vote. The group's president says that women have to abandon the idea that they are weak and that they are dependent in nature. She's like, look, you got to step forward. Just because somebody has told you this your whole life and for generations and generations, it doesn't mean that it is true. This woman, Frances Willard, she says a wider freedom is coming to the women of America. Too long has it been held that woman has no right to enter these movements. So much for the movements. Politics is the place for women. So see, it's like, hey, if you would have just let us like have our like parades and stuff, we wouldn't have entered politics. Look at that, y'all. Men, take note. Or whatever, let us do all the hard work like you always do. Okay, so during this same time period, feminism is kind of shifting. Now, it's not really called feminism yet. That doesn't become a good slur until later in time. But it shifts towards something that's like a little bit more in line with your prevailing racial and like ethnic norms. Feminism of equal rights that claims that voting is part of a larger transformation of women's status. It's not necessarily like they don't knock that, but it continues to argue, the movement continues to argue for women's equality in places like employment, education, politics. But with this happening more and more often, native born middle class women who dominate the suffrage movement. So remember, suffrage is the right to vote. They claim the vote as educated members of a superior race. Yep, not even suffrage can get away from this backwards idea of one race being superior over another. We have this new generation of suffragettes and their leaders that they suggest that educational and like other voting qualifications, they do not conflict with the suffrage movement's like goals, so long as they apply equally to men and women. So it's like, look, we're totally fine if you don't want, those dirty Italians voting, but we would like to make sure that it is only the Italians. Wait, hold on. I said that backwards, I think. I kind of stopped listening to myself halfway through there. They're like, hey, look, you can be discriminatory towards people who are voting as long as you do it to both men and women. Like, we think that we, educated white ladies, we definitely, oh my God, y'all, this was the first movement of Karens. I found it. Look at that. That's where we can trace it all back to. They're like, look, as long as we're allowed to vote, you can discriminate against whoever you want to, whenever you want to, because that's totally cool. Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, she declares that immigrants and former slaves were given the vote with ill-advised haste. Catt suggests extending the vote to native-born white women to help counteract the growing power of the ignorant foreign vote in the North and the dangerous potential for a second Reconstruction in the South. Yeah. We have elitism within the movement, and this is where we get this idea of the slum vote. Like, this is where they're like, look, it was all these trashy men who defeated women's suffrage in California. Okay? In 1895, that's the same year that Booker T is giving his Atlanta speech, the National American Women's Suffrage Association holds its annual convention in Atlanta. And this kind of shows the peace that the suffrage movement has made with nativism and racism. It's that whole philosophy, sometimes you gotta sacrifice something to get the higher goal. I don't necessarily know if, these particular sacrifices are anything that was good. This is a liquor raid. Look at them. I just think they were really bored. Look at that. You get a hatchet and a hat. Look at their cute little hats. They're like, I'm taking an axe and I'm going to go break some stuff. I don't think anyone would say that that's not a good, healthy use of time. And this is a drawing depicting that meeting of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. We have Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony on either side of old GW. Look at him. He's even got himself like a little monogram blanket. That's why they had to have it at Atlanta, because they know Southern people monogram something as long as it'll stand still long enough. All right, I'm going to break here because I'm sure you all can use a break from me. And my nose is very stopped up, so I'm going to see if I can do something about that. Okay, love y'all. I will see you in the next video. No, I don't love you. I'm sorry. No one loves you. It is a lie. All right. Glad I could end that on a good note.